Emmett Till was born on July 25, 1941. Raised by his widow mother, Emmett, who went by the nickname Bobo, grew up in a middle-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Sadly, Emmett never knew his father because in 1945 he was executed while serving in Italy. In the absence of his father, Emmett took on many responsibilities from a young age. All who were acquainted with Emmett knew him to be responsible, funny, and infectiously high-spirited. Emmett, although only having been raised by one parent, was extremely fortunate to have been raised by his mother. Mamie Till was an amazing mother who exceeded both academically and professionally. Throughout her childhood, Mamie faced the first-hand effects of discrimination as an African-American woman. She defied all social prejudices and later became an excellent mother and advocate for justice following her son's death. The tragedy of the murder of Emmett Till, influenced by high racial tensions in the South, led to brave choices that triumphantly inspired civil rights activists during the Black Civil Rights Movement. In August of 1955, Mose Wright, Till's uncle, traveled up from Mississippi to Chicago to visit the family. Upon his departure, Wright planned on taking Emmett's cousin, Wheeler Parker, down to Money, Mississippi, situated on the Tallahatchie River, to see his relatives. Emmett, who had been excluded from these plans, begged his mother to tag along with them. At just 14 years old at the time, his mother was rather reluctant to let him go. However, he desperately wanted to spend time with his cousins and got her approval. On August 19th, the day before he was to depart, Mamie Till gave her son a ring from his father, engraved with the initials LT. On August 20th, Till boarded a train heading south for Mississippi, unaware of the troubles that lay before him. Since the Supreme Court's decision in the Brown v. Board case that segregated schools were unconstitutional, racial tensions in the South were higher than usual. Many whites urged to preserve supremacy. Lynchings, which had been on decline, returned to the South, driven by those desperate to maintain white supremacy. Public murders of blacks were not uncommon, and those who committed them were rarely prosecuted. The state of Mississippi was one of the most segregated states in America at the time, and reported more than 500 black people had been lynched since 1822. These tragic events would soon affect a young boy of only 14 years. On August 24, 1955, 3 days after Emmett had arrived in Money, Mississippi, an encounter with a white woman would soon lead to the death of an innocent soul, hence producing an uproar across the nation. After a long day of cotton picking, Till, accompanied by a group of teenagers, entered Bryant's grocery and meat market to buy some refreshments. The true events of what transpired next when Till entered the store are still unclear to this day. Carol Bryant, the wife of the owner Roy Bryant, was working as a clerk that day when he entered the store. He then left with 2 cents worth of bubblegum and accusations, unbeknownst to him, of whistling, flirting with, and touching the hand of the white female clerk. All of which he was accused was so unheard of in the white community. Interracial couples were socially unacceptable, and as well as the fact that Carol Bryant was married. Both of these added to the severity of what allegedly occurred. After the encounter, Till did not think much of it. 4 days later, on August 28th, Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.W. Milam came pounding on Mose Wright's front door at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. Startled by the loud noise, Wright went to the door and asked the 2 men what they wanted. Bryant responded, "Preacher, you got a boy from Chicago here?" Milam then butted in and said, "I want that boy that done the talking down at Money." Milam then went into Till's bedroom and dragged him out of the house at gunpoint. Knowing there was nothing he could do to stop them, Till's uncle watched as Bryant and Milam forced him into their car and drove away. Till's family was distraught as they waited upon his arrival back home to his uncle's house. However, they knew to expect the worst as the days went on. 4 days after he was taken, Till's body was found in the Tallahatchie River. Beaten, shot through the head, and a cotton gin attached to his neck with a barbed wire, Till's body was hardly recognizable. The only identifiable article on him was the initialed ring his mother had given him just before he left Chicago. His body was then shipped back home to his mother in Chicago. Mamie Till insisted on an open casket for her son's funeral, so that all the world can see, she said, what they did to my boy. Hundreds attended his funeral, showing support for his family and unifying against black discrimination. Jet magazine showed the deeply scarring photograph of Till's mutilated corpse in their magazine. An entire generation of young black people would remember the horror of that photo. The NAACP was a black organization that tried especially hard to keep the tragic death of Emmett Till current in the news as an attempt to make an example of Southern racism. The NAACP was especially determined to bring justice for Till's death because they too had experienced racism firsthand. In 1955, Reverend George W. Lee, an NAACP organizer, was also lynched. He had been the first black in his county to register to vote. As a result of this, Lee was killed on his way home from voter registration. His murder sent out a message to the black community that whites would do anything to uphold their supremacy, just the same as Till's murder. Other local leaders, such as physician and civil rights leader Dr. T.R.M. Howard, stepped forward following Till's murder. He had already been known for his activism in the state of Mississippi. Because his life had been repeatedly threatened for his controversial views, he had armed bodyguards to protect him and his family at all times. Soon enough, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were arrested and charged with the murder of Emmett Till. The trial lasted 5 days and was determined by an all-white jury. For one of the first times in history, black witnesses were called to stand to testify against white people. Because they were testifying against white people, their lives were also endangered, as this seemed as another threat to white supremacy. During this time, Dr. T.R.M. Howard so graciously extended protection from his personal bodyguards to Mamie Till, Moses Wright, and any of the black witnesses who testified in court. Mamie Till was one of the biggest advocates for justice of her son's death. Knowing that the case would be seen by an all-white jury, Mamie Till understood that it would be very hard to prosecute her son's murderers. She needed all the help she could get. In September of 1955, Mamie Till sent a telegram to the White House pleading to the president to personally aid in the seeking of justice for his son's death. I am the mother of Emmett Lewis Till and pleading that you personally see that justice is meted out to all persons involved of the beastly lynching of my son in Money, Mississippi, awaiting on direct reply from you. One of the defenders also reached out to the president. A Chicago boy, Emmett Lewis Till, was kidnapped and lynched in Mississippi this week. Would you let us know if your office has plans to take any action with reference to this shocking act of lawlessness? Despite these efforts, the president was unable to aid in the ways that Mamie and the defense needed. Dear Mr. Sangstack, the president has asked me to write you in connection with your wire of September 1st concerning the shocking death of Emmett Lewis Till in Mississippi. We are advised that the Department of Justice has been in close contact with the development of this case, but that so far their inquiry has failed to reveal any facts which provide a basis for federal jurisdiction or action. It appears, therefore, that at the present time the matter is solely within the jurisdiction of the state of Mississippi. In the event any basis for federal jurisdiction does develop, you may be sure that the appropriate action will be taken. With no evidence to show that this was a federal case, they were unable to provide assistance. No justice was ever seen for the murder of Till. The jury's final decision was not guilty, and all charges against Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were dropped. Although justice was never served for his death, the injustice of it inspired many. It was the most infamous case of the year and is often cited as a single incident that ignited the civil rights movement. His death motivated thousands of blacks to participate in demonstrations, marches, and protests for civil rights. Another inspirational person that arose from his death was his uncle, Mose Wright. For the first time in history, a courageous black man testified in a court of law against white people. Despite death threats, Wright still appeared in court and even personally pointed out the white man that killed his nephew. Although he was not properly considered a leader for the civil rights, many saw him as an inspiration in the black community. Emmett's mother, Mamie Till, also displayed tremendous bravery for speaking out against whites in vengeance for her son's death. Following her son's death, Mamie wanted to make sure he would never be forgotten. The book, Death of Innocence, the story of the hate crime that changed America, and the play, The Face of Emmett Till, were both co-written by her. Both display the true events of what happened during his life, his brutal murder, and the legacy he left behind. Emmett's death inspired many famous civil rights movement leaders that are well known in our society today. 100 days after his death, a black woman refused to give up her seat to another white passenger on the Montgomery City bus. Her name was Rosa Parks. She was then arrested and thrown in jail with violation of the Alabama bus segregation laws. After hearing this news, Joanne Robinson, who was a part of the Women's Democratic Council, called for a citywide bus boycott and asked for the assistance from a young minister. His name was Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. Inspired by Till's death, they took a stand for what they believed in and fought for black civil rights. Although they are the most well-known and famous leaders, Emmett Till's inspiration for others makes him a true leader of the black civil rights movement.